Nuclear warfare is a threat that has loomed over the world for decades, ever since the first bombs were used in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Many countries now have nuclear stockpiles that could turn the entire world into a wasteland, from Russia to India to the United States and many more. This threat has luckily kept all the nuclear powers in what could be called a nuclear peace, but we know that could change at any time. Today we are going to take a look at one of the first instances of one of these bombs being used, the Japanese city of Hiroshima at the end of the Second World War in 1945. Hey everybody, Cameron. Just wanted to hop in real quick at the beginning of the video and say thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate it. If you enjoy, please leave a like, comment, and subscribe. That really helps me out. But yeah, enjoy the video. There are many events that led to what would become one of the single most destructive events in human history. Starting off with the war. Since the 1920s, Japan had been riding a wave of nationalism and military development, which culminated first in their invasion of Manchuria in 1931, and later going to war with the rest of China in 1937. These events were solidifying Japan as a force to be reckoned with in the Pacific. For multiple reasons that we won't cover here, the Japanese ended up attacking the American fleet at Pearl Harbor on December 7, 1941. This event was truly one of the most important of the entire war, and had it not happened, things could have been very different. Throughout the rest of the war, the Americans would push through the Pacific in their island-hopping campaign to oust the Japanese from their fortified islands. By 1945, the defeat of the Japanese was imminent. Bombing raids could now easily reach Japan from airfields on Pacific islands, and met little resistance from the shattered Japanese air forces. Defeat seemed inevitable for the Japanese, though they fought on with ferocity and dedication. This fanaticism is one of the main reasons for the usage of the bombs on Japan. However, let's backtrack for a moment to something that was going on throughout the war, parallel to the fighting in the Pacific. The Manhattan Project is of course what I am talking about. This project began in 1939 with multiple goals in mind. The main goal, of course, being the development of an atomic weapon. The effort was American-led, with contributions from other countries like Canada. It was essentially a direct response to fears that German scientists had been working since the 1930s on developing some sort of weapon that utilized nuclear technology. The declaration of war in 1941 with Pearl Harbor increased the funds and effort that went into this project. Development ramped up in 1942, with Robert Oppenheimer named the director of the Los Alamos Laboratory in New Mexico in 1943. This facility is where a large amount of the work was done, and where the first bombs were built and tested. All
Work on the bomb went steadily forward in closely guarded
on July
plants.
16, 1945,
In New Mexico,
the first usage of an atomic bomb. Under Oppenheimer, two distinct designs had been made, one using uranium and the other using plutonium. One of each would be dropped in Japan, on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. This takes us back to 1945 and the decision that would change the course of history. Faced with a Japan that many did not think would capitulate unless there was a full invasion of the mainland, which could easily cost millions of lives, the Potsdam Declaration was issued by the U.S. and its allies. This called for Japan to surrender to the Allies' terms, or face prompt and utter destruction. The declaration was rejected by Japan, as it offered no place for the emperor in the new Japan, and Hiroshima's fate was sealed. After approval by then-President Harry S. Truman, the plan to drop atomic weapons on Japan was set in motion. There were many potential targets for the bombing, and the first was decided to be the city of Hiroshima, with a population of 550,000. The strategic target was the home of the Japanese Army headquarters defending Kyushu, and had many war industries. At 2:45 a.m. on August 6, 1945, 3 American B-29 bombers took off from an airfield on Tinian, an island in the Pacific, 1,500 miles south of Japan. One of the bombers was the Enola Gay, piloted by Colonel Paul Tibbets. This plane carried the nuclear bomb nicknamed Little Boy, which weighed nearly 10,000 pounds. It was so heavy that the plane needed 2 miles of runway to take off. The flight went without problem, and at 7:15 a.m., the bomber crew armed the bomb, and the plane went to the bombing altitude of 31,000 feet. At 9:14 a.m., the bomber arrived over the city, and the bombardiers spotted the Aoi Bridge, which was the target for the bomb to drop. After lining up the sights, at 9:15 a.m., the bomb bay doors were opened, and Little Boy was let loose into the air. At the loss of weight, the plane jumped 10 feet, and Tibbets regained control and began to fly away. They had only 45 seconds to get away before the blast, and even then it was unknown if they would be safe. Little Boy fell 6 miles and detonated at about 2,000 feet above the ground, above a clinic next to the Aoi Bridge. It exploded with a force of over 15,000 tons of TNT, which immediately engulfed the city in heat and light. The temperature was over 7,000 degrees right after the detonation, which disintegrated people up to half a mile away from the detonation site. Buildings were flattened, and people even miles away were burned by the intense heat released from the bomb. Around 80,000 people are estimated to have died immediately following the blast. In the Enola Gay, which was now miles away, Tibbets and his crew saw a rising mushroom cloud, and at the base of it, where there used to be a city, was now a mass of smoke and flames. On screen are what the aftermath of the bomb looked like. In the immediate days that followed, the survivors in the city moved through the rubble trying to find lost loved ones. Many suffered from horrible burnings as a result of the heat from the blast. Alongside this, the radiation from the bomb would have devastating long-term effects. All told, the entire city was essentially wiped out, and the population was devastated. The bombing of Hiroshima has gone down in history as a hugely influential moment. It absolutely changed the course of the next 40 years and was a contributing factor to the Cold War and the complex problems of the years that followed. Japanese officials determined that around 70% of the city was destroyed in this blast, not even taking into account the horrible human cost. One of the most interesting things is to take a look at Hiroshima Today. The city bounced back incredibly quick after the war, thanks in part to the American effort to rebuild Japan after their surrender, in a way to promote goodwill. There has been many long-lasting effects on those that were at the site of the blast. The radiation had many short to long-lasting effects. In those at the site initially that survived, many would later die from radiation sickness as a result of what they were exposed to. Alongside this, there were many cases of cancer developing later in the lives of those exposed, causing even more deaths. These complicated longer-term effects made it hard to determine the true cost of the Hiroshima bomb, and most casualty estimations will have a lot of variance. In the end, in the debate over whether the bombings were justified is possibly what is talked about most in modern days. In the end, the debate over whether the bombings were justified is possibly what is talked about most in modern days. It is a hugely complex issue, that the discussion of which would require its own video. If you would all like to see that, leave a comment, and maybe I'll do that sometime in the future. However, the bombing of Hiroshima was a tragic and resounding moment in human history, and will go down as a clear example of what happens when humanity is thrown to the wayside in war.